Welcome to the Lakeshore Collective.
So this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about Moses. And I have in my head a picture, when I think about Moses coming down from the mountain with the Ten Commandments, it's cinematic. You know, it's Charlton Heston, and it's this picture. But I read something this week, someone had written, it's a novel that's based on Moses by the author Zora Neale Hurston, and she paints this picture. She says, Moses lifted the freshly chiseled tablets of stone in his hands and gazed down the mountain to where Israel waited. He knew a great exultation. Now men could be free. They had something of the essence of divinity expressed. They had the chart and compass of behavior. They need not stumble into blind ways and injure themselves. This was bigger than Israel. It comprehended the world. Israel could be a heaven for all men forever by these sacred stones. With flakes of light still clinging to his face, Moses turned to where Joshua waited for him. Joshua, I have laws. Israel is going to know peace and justice. So that's the picture that she painted, and it kind of fits in with what I have in my head. But here's what is actually in the book of Exodus in chapter 20. Then God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. When all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the smoking mountain, they were afraid and trembled and stood at a distance, and said to Moses, You speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us, or we will die. Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid, for God has come only to test you and to put the fear of him upon you so that you do not sin. And that's the word of God for the people of God. Amen. So these familiar words, they're glossed over a lot of times when we're talking about the Ten Commandments. I mean, you just know them, so you may not pay too much attention to what they're actually saying. But I read something from actually not a theologian, but a professor of ethics this week. And he wrote something called 10 Words on Life, Love, and Justice, which is how he phrased the Ten Commandments. It was a long article, but some of the main points I want to summarize a little bit, and then we're going to have a discussion about these 10 Commandments. He says that the Ten Commandments are in and of themselves the covenant between God and God's people. In other words, that's the terms and conditions of this covenant relationship. And that all 10 of the covenants express 10 ways to love God. Now, you'll hear a lot of times people talking about, well, these first few are about relationship with God, and the latter ones are about relationship with other people. But this professor makes the point that, you know, when you are honoring God, you are loving other people because it changes your behavior and you're a better neighbor. And when you're loving your neighbor, then you're really honoring and loving God too, because God created the people that you are taking care of. So that's his point there. And then he says that the Ten Commandments are principles of life and freedom. And we don't really usually think about it that way, I don't think, as laws being freedom, but they're not a checklist, a to-do list to be given God's grace, which is already given to us. They are really commandments and laws that help us to stay free and to live in a better relationship with God and with other people. So, in other words, the law is like a cup of coffee, or in my case this morning, a cup of hot tea. Um, if you have commandments, they are like the structure into which the good news is poured. So, in other words, you could have just the container and it's empty, a cup. And it might remind you that maybe you're thirsty and missing something. You could have just the laws. And you could have the coffee or the tea, but if you don't have a cup to put it in, then you're not going to be able to make that a part of yourself. You're not going to be able to consume it. So the commandments are the cup, and the good news of God's grace is the coffee or the hot beverage or the tea that you pour into the cup. So in thinking about the Ten Commandments, what I want to do this morning, were you able to get me online on my phone? I'm going to talk to folks at home and in person, and going to ask you all to take a look at the questions that I posted. And while y'all are looking at that, I'm gonna read them. They're in your bulletins if you're in person, and they're posted here below in the comments if you're watching on Facebook. So the first one, let's take a look at it. And it is about making wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God. It says, "You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for God will not acquit anyone who misuses his name." What? I mean, that seems a little harsh to me. But when we think about it, how often is the name of God used to justify power or to support empire in the name of domestic violence, political gain, or any kind of political agendas? So I just want to think about that first one for a minute and see if anybody can think of some examples of when the name of God is misused, and it might be breaking this commandment.
Well, everybody cusses, it seems like.
Everybody cusses. Okay.
And it just shocks me. Like, I will be watching a TV show and there'll be a Jewish family for sure, and they'll say Jesus Christ, and it always like hits me. It's like, why
are they using that? Yeah. Okay. So people do in curses, and it's become so common. I mean, I sometimes don't even make note of it anymore. Anybody else online too? You guys can post your answers if you have some thoughts on this. Some examples of when people misuse God's name, which is breaking this commandment after all. Oh, okay. I see it used to call a man godly when they are not. That's an interesting take. I hadn't thought of it that way before. I guess we do see that sometimes, that the name of God is used to promote a person, their political status or their career. That's a pretty good example. Anybody in person else or online think of another example? Okay, we can come back to this. If you think of something else, you can add that later on. But let's look at the second question, and that one is on Sabbath keeping. We overlook the importance of Sabbath, and what do we do to actually keep the Sabbath? And what do we do about the activities that we do that cause other people to not have a Sabbath? What do we do about people who, well, medical workers are needed to work, but then there are some optional things. And I like going out to eat, or sometimes to a football game or some other activity where people have to work to make that happen. And I just wonder how we can do a better job of keeping Sabbath than what we're doing now. And I guess in my head, I learned this after I was in ordained ministry, and I was working on Sundays, that I had to have a Sabbath some other day. And I think that we can do that, but I still go back, and this is sentimental and nostalgic, but I go back to when I was a kid, and Sunday afternoons, we went to church, we had lunch, or we went somewhere to family members for lunch, and then we visited all afternoon. That's what we did. And I'm a little sentimental about that, but I think there are other ways of keeping Sabbath, and I've been trying to do a better job myself of that. But I don't know. Y'all have any thoughts on Sabbath keeping? And as a culture, we tend to not, we don't support the idea, which is a God-given idea, that everybody needs a day of rest. Because we are so focused on go, go, go. One of our in-person persons here this morning said that yesterday was a day of rest, right? And you just needed that. And I think we do need that. And I think that's one of the reasons for this commandment is to recognize that we all need some time to really do nothing, And we don't seem to value that. And I have as hard a time with that as anyone. What are any ideas on how we can do a better job and maybe be a better example for our friends and neighbors who are also scurrying around trying to cram all kinds of activities into every day of the week? Have y'all found any ways that maybe it's an activity that you like doing? We're here in this park this morning, and it brings to mind to me that this is Sabbath keeping for people, going for a walk in the park or playing pickleball or, having kids on the playground. But are there some other things that you kind of look at as keeping Sabbath?
I think one of the things you have to really be conscious of is, yes, this is a really wonderful environment for us. We can take a walk afterwards, and this could be our Sabbath, but there's still somebody working here today.
That's right. Yeah, there is
And
still.
it just happened for
Yeah.
us, and I think
Yeah.
that's in every situation.
Yeah.
You know, somebody has to, if you're gonna be staying home all day, somebody has to do all the cooking.
Right.
So if you're gonna go, do something else, there's always another person that has to help you, that's helping you get to do what you want.
Right. So I don't know if you folks that are watching at home heard this, but we're here in this park, and Christine was just saying that because we're here, someone else has to be working. This is a staffed park, and they are park rangers. And if you're staying at home, someone's going to have to prepare food, so someone's going to have to do some work. I'm reminded of some of my Jewish friends that really do keep Sabbath in that they don't do any work. I mean, I've stayed with folks in a hotel, and they took the stairs because they're not allowed to turn on lights or do anything that uses up some energy. And they had to have their food prepared for Sabbath the day before so that no one had to do, what you're saying, food preparation. And I guess like if the folks here working here on Sunday, we need to recognize that sometime during the week they're going to need a day off or some time to rest for their Sabbath. But I don't think we talk about that a lot because we're too busy cramming things into every little busy schedule. But I think it's something to think about. And some years when I've gone to the Wild Goose Festival and did a little presentation for small groups, one of the topics for a couple of years was in Sabbath keeping. And some of the older practices of Sabbath keeping that I've tried to incorporate are sometimes, just keeping some silence, not talking, or using some things like Lectio Divina or the Daily Examen. These are practices that people have been doing for generations. And when you look at in that time period when there were desert mothers and fathers, and people would make pilgrimages to them, these were some of the practices they were doing. Okay, online, Becca says it's very important to set aside time, even if it is an hour instead of a day. That's a good point. That's a very wise thing, I think. Anything else about Sabbath keeping or what we can do? You
can buy GE. They sell a whole line of Sabbath refrigerators, stoves, whatever, and they don't use any electricity at all. They're designed to be completely powered off.
Wait, what? GE sells a line of
Sabbath
appliances that turn themselves off just for the Sabbath?
Yeah, they use no electricity.
Really?
None. the refrigerator, it doesn't power, no light, no nothing. Yeah, it's all completely Sabbath enabled.
Well, does, I guess it has enough residual cold to
That's
keep
the
things?
idea. It's designed for
Okay,
the 24
so it doesn't
hours.
defrost your freezer
No,
and ruin all
exactly,
your food every
exactly.
week?
It's designed for that.
Okay, I had no idea that there was a line of Sabbath keeping appliances.
Yeah.
Okay, that's maybe one thing.
But the idea is they're putting no load. They're not causing somebody to have to sit
They're not-
at
yeah,
McGuire
no,
and keep
yeah,
that nuclear
right.
power plant running. At least they're not.
That's addressing the idea that we're trying to help other people keep Sabbath too.
Yeah.
You know, I guess I think in our families and in our neighborhoods with our friends, we can perhaps encourage this whole idea of just having some downtime by hosting a Sabbath afternoon. You know, when I was a kid, we would come to the lake. We lived in Krause, and we would drive down to the lake on the weekends, and Saturdays and Sundays. That's what people did. They came over and visited, and we swam and we fished and we did all those things. And maybe we've gotten away from some of that. I know that. Becca and Gideon were talking about they were having a Friendsgiving yesterday, I think. And then I was talking to another person on the trip that I was on yesterday, and she said, and she's you know, in her 20s, and she said, Friendsgiving is great, and it's just that, it's getting together. Now, there's some work that has to go into making that happen because people have cooked, but then you do have that time set aside. Oh, Jennifer says that her oven has a Sabbath setting. Well, look at you, how progressive that you've got a Sabbath oven. I'll have to come visit you on a Sunday and see that not working. So, anything else about Sabbath? No? Okay. Well, let's take a look at this third question on coveting, because I think that's one that pretty much all of us seem to have a problem with. We're taught to covet through media that dominates most of our lives. TV, radio, online, social networks. I mean, it's just the culture that we live in. So how can we resist that coveting? I mean, I think someone posted somewhere or told me maybe yesterday, it was Bishop Carter, I believe. He said he covets because he covets his neighbor's iPhone because he sees it in their hand, you know, the latest iPhone or whatever it is that is your thing. And, you know, advertising targets that. And now with, you know, AI and you know, Siri and Alexa and things listening in, we get very targeted ads. And so they're really hard not to always want more and more. And to see your neighbor, you know, they have this, maybe they do some renovation in their backyard and they'll put a pool in or something. Okay, it'd be hard not to look at that if you don't have one yourself and you really wanted one. It's hard not to covet. But, and I guess maybe what I want to look at too is, what is the purpose of this rule when it tells us not to covet? What does it do for us when we can set that aside? I don't know. There's a quote, I can't believe I'm using this quote from Louis C.K. He's a comedian, but he says, the only time you look in your neighbor's bowl is to make sure that they have enough. You don't look in your neighbor's bowl to see if you have as much as them.
Say that again.
Okay, I'll say that again. This is Louis C.K. The only time you look in your neighbor's bowl is to make sure that they have enough. You don't look in your neighbor's bowl to see if you have as much as them. So that's taking the idea of coveting and trying to turn it around so that you're not looking at what your neighbor has because you want it too, but you're looking at what your neighbor has to make sure that they have enough. Let's see. Anybody online have any comments or in person on
That's a
coveting?
hard one.
Coveting is a hard one,
Well,
I think.
the way he's laid it out that way,
Yeah.
it's like making sure that they have enough instead of what do they have that I don't have.
Right.
You know, it's a whole keeping up with the Joneses thing, but it's a whole different way of looking at it.
Well, and I think social media particularly Facebook, but others too, Instagram. And, you know, all we see are the shiny parts of people's lives, the great trips, the get-togethers, the food, pictures of glorious food, you know, in restaurants and that sort of thing. So, you know, it's kind of built into the way we live that encourages always wanting what somebody else has. I mean, it's even hard sometimes when you're looking vocationally, like if you are working for a company and you think you deserve a promotion and the person in the office next to you gets it instead, it's really hard to be happy for that person, instead of, you know, a little angry and upset that you didn't get that. So Jennifer says, I think it's to be happy for what they have without resentment or jealousy, which is hard. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do that. I don't have any easy answers for that. Becca says that Gideon said this, that it removes a source of conflict. Okay, there's the answer to that question. What does this commandment do for us if we follow it? It reduces or removes conflict. We were just talking about Israel, and what's going on there now, which is essentially, you know, it's a fight over territory. So if people didn't covet the territory, the land, the actual land, then I guess that would remove conflict. I don't know. What do y'all think about that? So how often are our arguments a matter of us wanting what other people have? I think maybe pretty often.
A lot of your internal struggle is if you just, you know, who you are and how you feel about things in general.
Yeah.
You don't, you know, you didn't covet everything on Instagram, all these beautiful things that you see, curated places and foods, and you didn't, you know, covet them. I mean, think about how much easier, you know, your life would be if you didn't
Covet what you saw online or what other people, it would make your life easier. That it would reduce that internal conflict. Is that what you're saying? That always feeling, you know, what's the term that social media created? FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
I think I suffer from that because, you know, I have a phone in my hand or a computer in front of me or a TV almost all the time. And it's not a healthy way to live. And we know that, but we're so drawn to it. All righty. Well, if you have any other thoughts on that, you can go back and you can post on Facebook and kind of continue the conversation afterwards. But there's one more that I wanted us to take a look at. And why do we, when we look at these 10 commandments, some of them we are much better at keeping than others. We take them more seriously, like do not kill, do not murder. That's pretty easy for most of us. But we have a harder time with some of the ones we just mentioned. Coveting, I think, is probably at the top of many people's list. It's hard to do that. But what would it look like if we took all of them seriously at the same level and tried to follow all of them? There would be peace in personal lives and internationally, you know, between countries, even if we did that. So I guess what I wanted us to think about today, instead of just like reading them, they're a list, yeah, we should all do this, is to really kind of wrestle with what it would look like. And if we did these things, you know, all the time or as much of the time as possible, and maybe that will point us to why they're in the Bible to begin with, why, you know, why these are really a road to freedom. If we actually did all of these things, I think our lives and the lives of everyone would be better. So I guess I'd never thought about it until I read this one guy's essay about, this is freedom. This is the freedom not to have to strive to have what your neighbor has, and the freedom to, know that even if you have a difficult relationship with a parent, you can honor your mother and father in other ways. There may be some different things to look at for individuals when they're looking at different things on this list. Becca says we would have a much stronger appreciation for people and the world around us. I think that's true. So, I know that the Ten Commandments are something that people, they argue about whether they should be posted in public places like in courthouses, schools, that sort of thing. We don't have to have them posted for us to be aware of them. I think it's a good reminder to go back and read them every once in a while and see, okay, which ones do I need to work on? I don't know, maybe we could pick out one a week to really think about for the rest of this year. As we're getting, in a few weeks and a few months, we're going to be in Advent, and then we come up to the beginning of the year where we make resolutions. So maybe as a prequel to all of that, we can, I'll spend some time taking a look at the Ten Commandments and pick out one or two each week. We can start with the easy ones like do not kill. I think most of us can probably check that one off, that we've managed not to kill anyone so far today. But maybe take a look at some of these others. I think the not coveting would be a big one for us to try to wrap our minds around. That might take that might take a whole month to focus on not coveting. And I think Sabbath keeping might be a big one for us to take a look at too. I don't know, are there others that you think that folks might have a hard time with, or some that we could learn to take more seriously? I mean, I look at the first few and like not having any other gods, not making any idols. And if we think about that broadly and think about that in terms of idols can be not just gods, what the ancients thought of as gods, but things that we worship by how we live, like, our phones, our technology, or whatever it is. That would be freeing to not place so much emphasis on some of those things. Maybe we can resolve not to cuss and use the Lord's name in vain, or use it for our own benefit.
The ramifications of some of them are a lot more than others.
They are. The ramifications are.
Jail for the rest of your life.
Right.
You'll have peace because you'll be in a little cell.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. So, yeah.
You'll have a lot of downtime.
Yeah, I guess so. That would be the upside if you don't keep the commandment to not kill and you get convicted and you have to spend time in a little cell. Alex is, I don't know if y'all could hear it online, but saying that you would have peace because you'd be in a little cell, perhaps. Reading and thinking, yeah. It was interesting yesterday at the museum that we went to. There was a whole thing on the Gullah Geechee. Am I saying that right? Okay, folks in the lowlands of the coast, and talking about their lifestyle. And one of the things they talked about was that in that culture, children would go into the forest by themselves for an extended period at a certain age. I mean, not very young. The boy that they were showing in the video looked like maybe 10, 12 years old, so pretty young, but not a toddler. And it was to go and reflect on their lives and their connection to the world. And, it just made me think, well, that is really a Sabbath keeping thing. I mean, it's maybe a one-time thing in someone's life, but it's built into their culture. And if we could build some more of these practices into our own cultures, I think we would be happier people the world around us would be better too. I don't know. Is there anything else about the Ten Commandments? I just wanted us to spend some time talking about it this morning.
Sabbath keeping has always been kind of difficult for
Yeah.
me. Growing up, we didn't have many things to do. You went to church, you came home, and that was it.
Yeah, yeah,
There was nothing else to do. But today, there's so many other things that are pulling you in different directions, especially when you have young children. And church can be one of those things. Because we had so many times where we would be home on a Sunday afternoon, and then we'd go back to church for
yeah.
something
So-
to.
Yeah, so even church added to the difficulty in keeping Sabbath because of all the activities.
Yeah.
I think so too. And I think sometimes we don't do as much as a church or as a faith community to encourage people to just do nothing because we put so much value on the doing. And it is harder when you've got small children at home and you want them to do, with our kids, we wanted them to do all the sports activities they wanted to do and do all the church things that we wanted them to do. And it just creates a culture of busyness that's maybe not healthy. One thing, in kind of summing things up, I do want us to, and I don't think any of the folks that I know personally do this, but I've seen other people use the Ten Commandments as stones that they throw at other people. I really think we need to look at ourselves and worry about keeping those commandments ourselves and not in an accusing way of accusing other people. I just think that that's how they've been misused some. And take God's advice and rest and don't worry about some of these other things that people have. Instead of the Ten Commandments, they're not like you do this and you get that. If we can quit looking at them like that. God's not a taskmaster who's just like daring us to kind of step over the line and then we're in trouble. I think God really wants us to succeed at keeping these commandments, and that's because God wants for us an abundant and a full life, and a life that is in every way what we would want it to be, the best possible life. And that's why we have some of these rules. If we would just pay attention to them and really try to observe them ourselves, I think that will have a ripple effect on those around us who see us doing that. The whole push to have, and I know that this is a little controversial even, that sports teams that schedule things on Sundays, and used to be Wednesdays were not days that community sports teams would do anything because it was out of respect for faith of most of the people in the community, Sabbath keeping. And I've had great respect for people in the past when they've had kids that were involved in some extracurricular activity, whether it was sports or drama or music or whatever, and they would not let them participate on days when it was their Sabbath day for their family. And I think sometimes if people see us doing what the Ten Commandments say, and maybe even asking us, well, why are you living this way? Well, these are the rules that God has given us, and if we live by those, it's better for us and it's better for you. So maybe we can just take the Ten Commandments a little more seriously. Look at the harder ones. The easier ones we don't have to focus on so much, but the harder ones like coveting and maybe Sabbath keeping, maybe a few others might be hard for some of us, and live into what God calls us to live into, an abundant life. So thank you all for the discussion this morning. It's been good, and thank you all who've been watching. Oh, one more comment from Becca. She said, Gideon says, sometimes doing nothing leads to the best on something. She's quoting Pooh Bear. Is that a Winnie the Pooh quote? Sometimes doing nothing leads to the best. Okay, all right. I'll have to look that up. Anyway, hope you all have a good rest of the day and take a look at everything that's going on this week with the Lakeshore Collective. Some of those activities are designed really to not do much. It's just to have a meal with friends and have some conversation. We're going to go back to Waterside Cafe and maybe play some music bingo again. That was a fun place to go to. And some of our activities are really just about some of this, what we've talked about today, is resisting the pull of the world to be busy doing other things and just spend time with each other. So I'm going to invite you to go from this place today to live a life pattern after God's grace and share the hope, joy, and love that you receive from God with your neighbors wherever you go. Hope to see you all sometime later this week. Bye now.